Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Contact Lost. I will be your host today and I'm Joker, and with me today are some regulars. So please welcome Typhus.
Hello.
And Pumba.
Hello everybody.
First of all, sorry guys for not really posting or recording regularly. I mean, our last episode was I think 2 weeks ago. Also featuring Pumba, and if you had listened to that, you might realize, at least partially, why this is the case. Because I'm not too much into 40k nowadays. However, we have had a request from one of our listeners to talk about team events on team composition, actually, and as that is a subject that we like to discuss here and have done so many times, we're happy to take it up again. So, guys, I mean, I think it's a bit of a broad question, but how does a team of 8 come to be? Pumba, why don't you give it a go?
So
Improvise
generally, generally there are many philosophies of building a team composition, I believe, especially in 8v8s because it's the biggest format you can get and it's specifically WTC format. I don't think there are many other, if any, actually. I mean, there are definitely events. I know of some run in the UK that run the 8-man format, but that's not a format that is prevalent and it's not very popular because it's so hard to actually build a team into. So I feel like building a team for such a format is way different than building for some smaller formats, and it all is very dependent on how hardcore and how dedicated are your players, I feel like. I think there are two main philosophies. Of course, Typhus, if you would like to correct me if you disagree with anything, you're more than welcome to. At the end, you are the person who has already gathered a Polish team together many times, and I'm just now being a team selector for my first year. So
God bless your soul.
I am gonna need that. Thank you very much. So I think the two main attitudes I've heard of when building a team composition is you either go with what you choose your players by the virtue of them being faction specialists, and you let them design their own list very carefully and with much of a, let's say, free hand of what they can do and pick. For example, if they focus on a specific faction, you would like them to build a list for a task, let's say. So I want you to build this faction list, but I need you to go 20-0 each game. You will be our top scorer, for example. And the other approach would be to have a team comp in mind, in a sense of team army composition in mind. So I need a specific army, and I will just tell people that I need that army, I need it played, I need someone to pick it up and build for it and prepare a list for that specific faction because I think it is way too important to have it in the team composition. Most of the time, though, I do believe it's a combination of the two, and this is what usually happens in those formats, at least from my experience.
Well, if I were to add to all of that, I think whenever we are talking about like a new community, new team coming up, I think what you should focus mainly is actually finding out the players. I do think it will be your main limiting thing. Actually, what armies you have at your disposal, what players can play. Then you can talk about like the whole team composition, who will play what will play into what will be used in a specific way during the pairings. But first of all, if you're a new face, you need to realize what everyone can play and then maybe work around it, because that's the main limiting factor. as it was even for us within the team. Like we had few players that we knew need to play their army, and others can just then be more malleable and actually choose armies that would more fit what's needed. But I agree that there are like two main philosophies from what I've talked with other captains. I think one of them is actually figuring out what's gonna be meta, how are we gonna counter stuff. The other approach is the one I see more teams who come from like smaller communities, less hardcore competitive, is to actually just bring what you think is 8 good armies and then figure out as you go. Whilst when I've talked to teams like France or English guys, their approach was more about actually figuring out how armies will work within the team at one point. So it all depends on the approach, but I think one of them requires much more devotion of each player's time and especially captain's time. And that is the one that is with a team comp in mind. Otherwise, it's way easier to figure out what are the good armies and then continue with what you have.
And what would be you guys' approach? I mean, let's suppose that there would be an 8v8 in Poland, not necessarily WTC, because WTC you've got the whole selection process, etc., etc. The costs and logistics come into play as well, so it's not exactly for everyone. But say if there was something locally like that, how would you go about creating teams? So would you go first team comp and then selecting players that play specific armies and that are good with them, or just first pick a bunch of guys that play at a very high level and then assign them armies, if you will?
If I may actually jump into that question myself and discuss it, because I think studying an 8v8 team comp is very specific and sometimes very much more difficult than any other format. But I think it might be a good like insight and help for the listeners, so for everybody listening to us, to do a case study of building a 5v5 man team, because I do feel like it just many times the same principles will apply, but just scaled up to accommodate more armies and players. So what I've actually done in my local community now for at least 3 years running is I found players who are willing to come to actual events with me. By the virtue of playing and organizing many local tournaments, I've gathered a bunch of guys who are like-minded in the competitive sense, that they would like to improve their gameplay, and they would like to participate in any national and international team events with me. So that team is now called Krakow Smoke Brigade, and I've been going to many Polish and events abroad, like in Prague, that we won this year, actually, in May. And that team has, I think what's the most important from the perspective of the captain is the fact that I know those guys really well. And that gives me a lot of insight into what I can and cannot expect from each one of them. And this also means I can decide for each player how much pressure and expectation I can put on each of those guys. Generally, we have a mix of faction specialists that will just take one faction and master it and play it all the time and like hardcore spam it to learn every matchup, to be prepared for everything. And that's especially useful, I feel like. If you are preparing for a specific event, you will need to recognize the meta you're going into. So that's as the captain, I feel like there is no way to avoid and the fact that you will have to spend time and prep time and general mental space that you will need to allocate to figuring what the meta is going to be. What are you expecting other teams to bring? Do you know them well? Can you expect something very specific from the top teams that you might be competing against, and such and so forth? And that information will then apply to your army choices and what you guys will actually play and how your team should look like. It's very similar to actually, running just singles events lists. You would, if you want to actually win such an event, it is still very important to figure out what's the most popular faction played by the best player is going to be, and try to play into that. So the same thing applies here. So what I would do, to give you a very specific example, is tell one of my faction specialists, for example, that I need a list from him, from let's say my Tau player, that will counter other Tau lists. I know that will be a very popular faction, that will be a faction that will come up in pairings and will be a problem for me. And now that I have this gentleman, his name is Druzik, and he's been playing Tau for at least a year, like really hard. He's made himself well known in the Polish community. And now I can trust him to develop a Tau list that will beat other Tau lists in the mirror. And the other approach and the other type of a player that I have at my disposal would be someone like me or Crazy, who was a part of the national team last year, who are more willing to jump from the army to army, and instead of focusing on a single faction, will spend their time preparing a build or a concoction of a build on any faction that fits them at least somewhat playstyle-wise, to bring the best what we can to fill out the composition, let's say, while having those other factions locked in.
I was actually thinking a couple of days ago before we recorded this about that, and I came to the conclusion that for an 8v8, almost any army is viable, provided that it has some play into something in the top of the meta, and at least in the place that we are now. Would you agree with that statement, or do you think that there's something that really lacks, I don't know, anything, power, tricks, what have you, play into top factions?
I think there's always a threshold how much of a use you can get from a given army, and I wouldn't go with absolutes that every army can be used. I don't think that at every stage, like, you could bring every army. Like right now, I would never see Imperial Fist making it into a team, and I would say it surely gives you much more access to different armies and different builds, because you have armies that can create a very specific niche solution for your problem within the team. But what 8v8s give is actually a chance to figure out whether a given army has something like that. But usually it is still limited to like what can still play on a singles event. Even if it's not in the win draw lose system, let's say it's a 3-2 army, it still needs to be actually decent, I would say.
Yeah, I think I generally agree. I do get the idea of you can try any faction, but there will be factions that just don't have enough legs to stand on, do not have enough just sheer power in them to have enough good matchups to be considered.
Yeah, they need to have shock assault for 5 points to be viable.
Yep, one more balanced data set and we will be there for sure this time, guys, for sure.
And 1-1 full ready, so yeah, fingers crossed to that. So guys, an event of such a scale is usually a couple months down the road. I mean, you need to register your team, some way before the event actually happens. And the meta tends to be quite ever-changing nowadays. So how do you approach that? You know, like when there's, let's say, a tournament would be planned for February, and obviously January is a month that we expect a lot of change in Warhammer 40k. So what are your safeties for preparing for such an event?
One of them would be having players that can play, for example, 2 armies, and not like a faction specialist, because one army can just get completely obliterated by a balance change. And other thing is also, when you choose your 8-man squad, is to have players who are flexible enough to actually figure an army within a week or 2. If there's something that's gonna pop up, if there's new hot shit, you need that meta chaser within your team that will be able to grab an army and kinda do well from where he stands.
I completely agree. There will be sometimes time that you will bring like a super specific faction specialist to an event. So now you are limiting yourself in that sense. Let's say this gentleman has definitely no ability to play any other army, for example. So now you are kind of limiting yourselves, and now you're putting your eggs in the basket that this army will be playable or good, for example. But the other takes on that might be that this army will get, for example, completely obliterated in the latest patch, or like super nerfed. But if that guy is good enough on them, if theoretically he's such an excellent player on that specific army, and he has the ability to figure out a build for it, even after the nerf, you might have like a black horse of a list then that will have your opponents surprised because they did not expect this particular nerf faction to appear in your team, right? So it can also be somewhat of a feature.
All right. So yeah, we've talked quite a bit now about faction specialists. So and I guess this is going to be a hard question to answer, but do you generally prefer to have faction specialists, or rather guys that can play a couple of factions? And I guess the answer to that will probably be a mix of both. But anything, guys? Pumba, why don't you start?
I mean, if I had a perfect world and a perfect team composition, I would love everybody to be a faction specialist with every army, right? That is the best of both worlds. This is the ideal situation, let's say, and it's very hypothetical because that usually doesn't exist. I think having players be really competent at least a couple of armies is like the middle ground that you would be expecting if you are trying to really like build a team with specific people, because building a national team, for example, will be very different to building a team like from your local players, from your local environment, because then you are limiting yourself even more to maybe your mates. You just want to play with them. They are a team that you enjoy hanging out with, and let's be honest, 99% of the events people attend are there to be enjoyed and just to have a nice time with your mates.
Not according to Reddit.
But according to actual real world, that is the case. So that kind of thing would be very different to building a national team, right? So because of that, I think when thinking about building a national team, I would very much at least have everyone involved playing and being competent, like really competent, with at least 2 factions is the minimum I would expect. just to not have that one person being like a super faction specialist that can play absolutely nothing else, because that will sometimes limit you too much.
I would say I would like to touch upon this from different angle. I think what I would like within a team is not necessarily a team of people who know many factions. I would prefer what I would call a playstyle specialists. There are certain armies that play in a very different way. You have armies that will tend to shoot opponents off board. You have armies that are inherently tricky and very mentally consuming. And I would like a team that kind of has few of those players that can play specific archetype of an army that they feel comfortable in. Because I, for one, cannot imagine myself playing shooting guard. Like I would just die from boredom. And this, you need somebody who can play that army and enjoy it, even though it's a brain cancer. But like to each their own. But and not have too many players that, for example, want to play tricky combat armies like we have a problem probably within our team for Alpine Cup.
That might come up, yes. And we will be polling Strauss, by the way, who plays the shooty of your board list, by the way. And it will
the one
be
who drinks the most.
It will be you, by the way. That will happen.
Are you telling I have the shortest straw?
I am not saying that. I am just implying.
Yeah, okay, only implying. Suggesting.
Oh, I'll remember that one.
But did you finish your train of thought though, or did it get derailed now?
No. I think I kind of got there.
Okay.
I do not think that there's that much of a faction specialist. When you even look at our community, you have few players that can actually play different playstyles. Usually, everyone is kind of dedicated to one specific playstyle they just enjoy and just want to play.
That's also an interesting thing, I feel like, because I've heard many people, or at least some people, in this whistle, saying that the playstyle doesn't exist, and that any good player will play anything, which is, I feel like, true for some people. But it makes things way harder, right?
You need to make a differentiate being able to play a specific play style
and enjoying
playing it. Because if you do not enjoy, you will not put the time.
Yeah, I feel like that's the biggest.
And it might affect performance, right?
Yeah. So I would say there's a thing called playstyle, but rather in what player prefers to do, because he will put more of himself into it.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Like I can play Tau or Shooty Guard. I won't enjoy it, but if you force me to, I'll play it. I will just not put as much time if I were to play weird shit that I just enjoy trolling people with. So
like 300 brimstones.
Yeah, that was 200 to get your facts straight.
Sorry.
Yeah, but that's another example. Like I could play Horde. I would hate it, but I could play Horde. And there's like Vladdy probably could play it as well. He would go fucking molding already, like from the get-go, but he could play it.
True.
It's not like
I don't know if he's back.
Basically putting, I think we agree on the fact that putting someone on a playstyle that he's not very comfortable with will just make them put less time into it. Yes, as you've just said. And that, when preparing for an event, especially of the WTC caliber, will just eat at your level of preparation and then probably results.
Yep.
Right, so you both touched about interesting things, actually. So I'll come back to both of those. As it's more fresh, let's start with Typhus. So let's take the team composition from a different angle. in terms of archetypes or play styles, what do you think an ideal team composition would be, or like how many attackers, defenders, armies that can, you know, grab points of anything, and then hard hitters that are just gonna go for the maximum score?
I would start with saying that I don't think there's an actual formula for this. I think it all depends on the terrain pack you have. Terrain pack will force you into specific team compositions, allow you to have more hitter armies or more drawish playstyle. Like I can imagine if we were to play 8v8 with slightly different GW tables, a lot of games could be very, very damn close. But if we have tables that allow more play with different approaches, like I think WTC does, for better and for worse, you can approach the team with in a few different ways. I personally prefer to have not a dedicated attacker, but have dedicated cog blockers. I think that's something that needs to happen because some armies are bound to be better in the meta. And if you have an army that's just there to deny opponent points, it can be a huge difference. What will score you points in a given round can change from round to round because opponent might bring something else within his team that what you thought would be a dedicated counter won't work into that. So yeah, that's my approach.
I have really nothing to add there. I think that solves the issue of attacker defender. I think many of the times I've actually built my team or a specific team composition for 5v5 events, I have not done a single list of or like a dedicated spot for attacker defender at all, and I've just went with what I felt was the best straight up army compositions, and just figured out who was the necessary defender on the spot. So
I would say
I felt yeah.
I would say that it's really comfortable to actually have a defender set in mind that you can, if you do not have an idea, default to that army to be your defender. I think it gives you a lot of comfort when it comes to actually doing pairings and stuff. And I know it's an approach that Vladi took throughout his years. And I do not think there's an army that should always defend. Like we've done at WTC, I was a defender 5 times, I think, and twice not a first defender. But yeah.
I agree. I mean, there is one thing about like having your team composition in mind and the plan for the event, as in like this will be our first defender. Especially the first one, I think, is something that makes your life way easier when doing the pairings. But then not being blindsided by that choice that you've made at the beginning or at the process of building your team composition when the time comes. Like, you need to still consider all of your options and have them available to you.
All right. And the other thing I wanted to touch upon, Pumba, you've mentioned team spirit directly, and you also said that you kind of like built your team, the Krakow Smoke Brigade, from the ground up, pretty much. So have you got like any tips for, I don't know, motivating people or like building such a team from the ground up?
I feel like that's one of the hardest things to do in whole of 40k, because I'm gonna be 100% honest. I think I just got lucky with the players I've met.
It requires social skills, guys. We are bound to be fucked. We play fucking plastic toy soldiers.
That is kind of the case.
Social skills? No, this is not.
You shouldn't talk to us. You have a wife.
God damn. He's ahead of the curve, boys. He's broken the system.
Well, yeah. I got lucky there.
So back to the actual question. I think I just got lucky with the players I came across. So the community was generally competitive enough that the players wanted to improve themselves. And then there was a whole thing of how do we actually get them to band together and help them improve? And that was about building, more than anything, I feel like building
Leader
an
failures.
environment. Not so much, I think. I mean, the leader figures came from just organizing tournaments, is how I've done it. So we had an 8th edition old terrain, for example, in our local gaming store that we organized all of the events in. And what we've decided to do, along with Crazy Man, who was the Krakow's coordinator at the time, is just improve the terrain, literally. We just sat down with a bunch of scraps, literally like old shelves, stuff like this, and built new terrain that at least somewhat matched what WTC was proposing for completely free, like in our own time. And that little push meant that every single tournament that we've run could be way more competitive, because that meant that any event wouldn't just end with people bringing the most shoot list and going first, right? Which was always, often the case, especially at the start of the edition. And
with
now
player place terrain.
For example, you just pick your first piece of terrain, or like put a small container at the middle of the table, and you're now set, right? Because the terrain was good, and because we started to organize like very regular events each month, and we had the specific people that really wanted to improve and get better and like ask specific questions, we just banded together to form something akin to a local scene, a team of some sort. And now, in the terms of getting people motivated to come to bigger events, I feel like if you already have people wanting to improve, one of the biggest hurdles and hoops to jump through is logistics, straight up. I think sorting out the logistics of going to any event will make people way more interested in actually going and attending, which I've been doing for at least like 3 years now. I literally just ask them, yo guys, do we want to go to this and this event? If yes, I then, in a matter of week, organize everything, pay for everyone, book hotels, probably also transport them to the place, and they have to play a game. Which, I mean, is something that makes people way more interested in actually going, because nobody likes the logistic parts of going to the event. I feel like, at least. You want to play some games and enjoy yourself, and don't worry about all the small stuff on the backs, like at the back end.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that last statement, but it can get tiring for you. I hope it doesn't, but speaking from my experience, it does sometimes become a pain in the backbone, if you will. Typhus,
You have
anything to add on
experience
that?
with babysitting, right? So literally.
Yeah, but you know, I've got more leeway for my kid than to actual other fucking adults, you know.
Yes.
Maybe mistakenly, I do expect more from grown-ups.
That's definitely a mistake from my experience.
You still have some belief in people.
Yeah, I do catch myself on that sometimes. But what about team spirit? How important it is, and how far can team spirit go? And is there anything you can do to make someone feel more included within the team? Typhus, why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Oh God, it now sounds like as if I'm giving a training for my corporate function. Like Team Spirit 101. Why is it
Yeah,
important? How
go
you should
for it.
make?
You get along
Yeah.
with like almost everyone in the community worldwide, so who better to ask than yourself?
I don't know. I'm just an attention whore. It probably helps, but
That could be it.
in all fairness, I think like everyone, their voice needs to be able to be heard. And if somebody just does, you need to know everyone in the team. That's what Pumba said earlier. Like you need to know how a certain person operates, how much they can put time into it, how much they can be exposed into orga stuff. It's a typical people management. And I don't know how to even put it into actual words, how to handle it. I think for me and Pumba, it comes quite naturally, and we didn't kind of have to learn it. At least I think so. I don't know,
I don't
maybe
know.
Pumba.
I think it's definitely a skill, because I have not ever managed a team of any sorts, for example, or I ever managed people and my either private life or work life or when I was studying and such. So I definitely had to learn how to behave in those situations. It is very difficult and it's very personal with literally every single person that you meet. So the only thing I can I can generalize in a sense that team spirit is absolutely crucial. Like if we ask the question, is it important? It's incredibly important. I feel like it's one of the things that makes or breaks the team when it comes to competing in an event, because playing a game of Warhammer is very mentally taxing, and it absolutely is a mind game at some level.
Especially if at one point you're basically being sacrificed within the team for someone that you don't like, then it's also rough. You can have people asking, why him, not me, and stuff.
Like, it's very difficult. It's one of the more complex, if not the most complex things to do, is to actually build a team that will work as a team, where every single player will feel like he's involved. He's just not. He's a sum of or like a part of a greater sum, right? And it will absolutely increase the results of a team if you have that going on. But how to achieve that is almost an unsurmountable question, I feel like.
I literally have no clue. Like, I could look for patterns in people behavior, but like, if I were to give a specific answer, I don't have one.
Okay. So let's try a bit of a different thing. In team events, people sometimes get thrown under the bus. Is there anything you can think of that you can do to make that a more enjoyable experience?
Well, making them realize that every point they brought actually mattered, which usually you don't see until you win a game by 2 points. Or more importantly, if you lose a game by 1 point, everyone will realize that their job was important.
Yep.
That it's sum of all parts.
It's actually, I feel like, comes down back to the team spirit thing and knowing the players, because for some people the best thing you can do is like focus really hard on how they should play the game, how they should scramble for any point. Sometimes the best thing to do is like let them know that they will take like a whole cock to the balls in their mouth, and they will be fine with it, and actually make them laugh about it. It's very personal, I feel like. It's also very it's a huge part of team events to be thrown under the bus, because it is sometimes just required. But do you feel like that there still, like, I seriously cannot find universal answer for everybody.
Same.
Because I know myself.
I don't
for
think
example,
there is a
if-
universal answer for everybody, is there?
I can tell for myself, for example, if I get thrown under the bus, I'm completely fine with it. Like, I can take all the shits and giggles if I lose, and I will be fine with it, like, legitimately. But it's very personal.
Mm.
Some people just cannot handle that role, and I know that, for example, within our community, Myson and Skark are people that wouldn't like to be in that role because they have that pressure of scoring high, etc. And we have people who are more comfortable with those roles when you are just basically trolling your opponent and getting as many points as you can. For example, me, I just love that. So it all depends on the person. And I think that's something that you need to take into account when creating a team and team composition, that whoever has an army that's going to be weaker or a first defender needs to be a person who handles losing hard very well.
Yeah, that does sound like natural fit now that you've mentioned it. So yeah, that's another good tip in the books. All right, guys, I'm out of questions completely. Do you have anything else to add about team events?
I generally feel like this is one of the most complex and difficult topics. I feel like in the world of 40k that now is growing rapidly, building an actual team composition for any event will be one of the biggest challenges that one can face as a player, or then transitioning into being a captain, because generally team events include more than just one person, and that involves a whole bunch of problems that come mainly from managing that. And as any sport, this will do two things, right? It will make it way harder, but also, from my experience, way more rewarding. If you manage to like jump through all of the hoops and overcome all of the challenges that you will face when building your own team, for example, or joining a team, or getting your players together, or practicing together, or any of that stuff, you will find out that it is one of the best, if not the best thing that you can do, is compete together in a team event, because that suddenly that social game that we all play because we kind of like social interactions can now be even better.
And I would also add to that team events are a self-balancing way of playing 40k, where even the worst meta in an 8v8 format means that if you have two armies that are absurdly dominant, in an 8v8 it doesn't matter, everyone can actually play.
Yep.
And that is a great thing that I think makes team tournaments for me actually more interesting, that I want to play them more, is because I'm myself not a guy who will chase the top of the meta just to get points. I don't enjoy that. And if you are forced into that, if you want to compete in an actual singles environment, you might not enjoy singles as much. But if you play singles in those metas with an underdog army, you might as well play team events and realize that your army might actually have more applications than what you are used to. So
more worth. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with those statements. Team events are really great. So, so if anyone has been reluctant so far to participate in one, do give them a go.
Find any team. Like, actually, find a team of people you don't know. You probably will like them.
That's the thing about it's as I've discussed previously, it's a social game, and the team events is just the best way to get better, because now you have a team to practice with, to get more enjoyment out of 40k, because now you are part of greater something, and it really shows, like, when people are way more motivated, from my experience in playing in such environments, and just make new friends.
Yeah, it's a great way into a community, right? I mean, there's really probably no better way to do that. All right, so we've covered team events. I think we've still got a little bit of time. So, Typhus, you've went to the Leicester GT to referee there. Pumba, I'm sure you've followed it along. Given
I had
that,
live coverage.
yeah, given that 4 out of 8 people in top 8 played the same army as you do. So, guys, any hot takes from that? Pumba, why don't you start us off?
Thousand Sons and Flamers good. I might or might not be literally painting Thousand Sons right now.
Yes, just make sure you sell them before
Like
Christmas.
literally right now, like holding my brush and putting on gold trim. But yeah, they are incredible, and but I also feel like they won't be an army that will dominate middle tables. I feel like they are a relatively difficult army to play that will require a lot of understanding of its possibilities and making a coherent game plan and especially executing it. So I feel like they will be for the coming weeks, because like months is I think overselling how fast they will nerf the flamers. Like I would expect them to pull some top 3 placings still, as Vic did, as David, for example, Gaylord did, go undefeated as well, as everybody with like every good player with the army is currently doing. But I like if you're playing on mid tables, for example, I wouldn't expect them to be such a menace as something like Tyranids were, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Or Votan can be a menace on mid tables.
Yeah, whereas I like really don't think they will be at the top tables. Like I genuinely don't find them that scary at the top tables.
I kind of agree with that. I think that army has a very huge skill cap, and the floor of playing TS before kind of didn't change. You've got abundance of small units nowadays that you can kind of give away for free and still be fine with it. But I think the win rates should be way higher if we were to look through actually top players rather than the regular players. I think the army still will be busted. I think it's better in win draw lose than in 20 nil, because it tends to play its own game that you kind of cannot interact with. So yeah. But coming back to the topic of Leicester itself, I think what was interesting for me to see was how dominant Flamers were on the top tables. And I say Flamers instead of TS plus Flamers. It was just in 4th round, I think top 8 tables were undefeated, and there were 10 demon armies and 1 pure Thousand Sons army, and the remaining 10 were either demons or demon with T-Sons mix.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of shows that this army is really prevalent, but at the same time, I want to add a caveat to that, is when I looked at the names playing those armies in Leicester, it was what? Vic, David, Josh Roberts, Nathan Roberts, Alex Petford.
Wasn't Nathan playing like Nets?
Uh,
Or no, he was playing pure demons, right?
Pure demons, yeah. But still, like those names are nothing to scoff at. Those are players who are good, and when you think about it, it actually shows how much army hopping they are. Well, which is sad, but well, Windrow does that to you. But I think like the event was actually kind of interesting. I saw plenty of games that I feel went way closer than I think they should. And
Any specific examples?
I think there was one game where I think David Gaylord was playing against Kraken Nits, and guy on a charge with Flyrant failed to kill 2 Flamers. I'm not shooting you.
That's some Pumba rolling right there.
Holy!
I saw those 5 hits, 5 ones to wound, 1 wound reroll to another one, and I was like, oh boy, you should have slow rolled that.
Holy shit!
and then he proceeded to lose by like 13 points. Yeah, I think there were a few games that got closer. One that I was really surprised about was, probably Pumba Konrad Bartkiewicz.
Yep.
Mhm. So he has a brother.
Yep.
Who can
I also
speak
know
Polish better.
I know.
And he played against Mike Porter and lost that game with Tau by 1 point.
Holy shit, that is incredibly close. That is legitimately
and Mike
insane.
Porter after the game went like, I don't know what happened. Why I didn't lose this? Why didn't I win this 20-0? What happened? He was literally confused. And the guy easily would have won if at one point he struck with his enforcer against 2 players instead of 3 players to take away an objective.
So he had
that
the
one
game, basically.
He had the game. He just fucked up at one point. So yeah. And I was standing by with Cal Grandi. Cal was reacting to it, and I just gave him a stare. No, like, you shouldn't say anything now, bro. Like, let them make those mistakes. So yeah, that was interesting. I think Nassim's game against Vic was interesting, except Nassim getting fucking wasted and hammered. There was one.
That might have been the most interesting part, to be honest. If I would.
He made an alpha move in Vic's turn. He changed the clock onto his time, downed a whole beer, and changed the clock back to Vic.
I respect I do respect it a lot.
So yeah, I was in awe of that. I think it was a close game, interesting one, because I think Nassim lost by like 6 points, but he failed to kill all 10 termies, so one was left, taking away an objective, which gave Vic 4 more primaries, and then Nassim didn't do what do you call it? Decisive action, holding 3 objectives. So it was exactly the points that he needed to win that game. So there was that. I think another game at the same time, Brian was playing 30 TS termies, and what's funny, turn 1, 20 termies charged him, managing to get off 10-inch, 11-inch and 9-inch charge. And then they just died.
Yeah, that actually can happen a lot. From my experience playing Thousand Suns, melee is actually not the place where they thrive.
Yeah, where they belong.
Yeah, I feel like 30-inch comfortably sitting, preferably in cover with Empiric Guidance is the preferable.
And to make this game even spicier, Brian lost his turn 1, I think, the big boss on the Squigosaur, because he was the first target to smite.
What? How? What?
Well, yikes.
Small mistake. Small mistake.
A small mistake. But you know what else was a mistake? Why he could be smited? Because Brian forgot to deploy 20 commandos that were supposed to be behind that ruin.
Oh.
So he started his turn 2 without a big boy and 20 commandos, and then won.
What a fucking legend! Let's fucking go. Well, I do respect that.
Yeah, playing with such a handicap in the semi-final.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's
take some
What
votes.
a legend! Wow.
Next game he played Vic, and actually Vic reminded him about commandos.
Always the gentleman.
So yeah, it was funny. The most difficult part throughout the whole weekend was drunk Nassim. That was the toughest part to handle. Other than that, it was great.
Oh, all right. How have you broke your leg or something of the sort? Which brings us to...
Oh boy, I will tell the story now.
Okay.
Coming back from the event was so much fun. Boy, like, first of all, on Friday, I bought myself I went to like a coffee bar that we were at with Pumba a year ago, which basically had really good coffee, and I decided to buy some coffee for like Christmas presents for family and such. So I bought those coffees, and on the way from that coffee shop to the event itself, something just cracked in my knee, and I was like, nah, it's gonna be fine. Turns out it wasn't. Surprise, surprise. But I just went to the event. I kind of was like, nah, what bad could have happened? So then
Foreshadowing.
it started hurting after some time. So thankfully, I took a compression sock with me, so I could actually handle it. But other than that, I got on the Sunday after the event when we were going to the hotel. First of all, I think somebody stole my how do you say shalik in English?
Scarf?
Scarf?
Yeah.
Maybe. Anyway, I just couldn't remember the name. Somebody stole it at the venue, so I was already in a pretty good mood. But other than that, when we were going back, when we were taking a turn on the highway, I think we clipped something on the highway with our car, and one tire just popped. Went just poof.
Literally popped. Holy.
That's
Literally. Literally. We're
Jesus Christ.
going, and then we kind of stopped going. So we managed to get to a McDonald's car park. It was like what 11:30 p.m. So we called road assistance. They arrived around 1, I think around 1, and thanks to that we got to the hotel at like 2 a.m. Then they changed our cards that we were supposed to get into our room with, so we needed to wait to get those done. But you know what was the most fun? It was that I had my flight at like 8:20 a.m. So
Ah.
I already knew that I'm gonna sleep like 3 hours, which was great. But in the morning, we decided to actually check the pressure on our tires, as we had to get new one. We check the pressure, we make sure it's fine, and then just as we leave the gas station, 5 minutes later, car starts swaying to the left. Guess what happened?
This.
Did another tire pop?
No, the vent, however you call it, just went off and left.
Mhm.
So
Was
car
that the same
slowly-
tire though?
No, that was a different one.
Fucking glorious,
So
bro.
we went. So we
It's like a
went to
comedy sketch
another.
at this point.
We went to another gas station, and when Gareth just walked out and checked the tire, he went like, "Fuck!" I knew that. Oh boy, I better start looking for another flight. And, oh boy, I was right, because another tire basically deflated fully, and at that point I had to rebook my flight because we called roadside assistant. They told us, yeah, the closest workshop will be open at like 9 a.m., which is in 3 hours, so you have 3 hours of staying here.
Ouch.
Lovely.
This goes.
Oh, poor guys. Series
so
of unfortunate events.
Then I had the pleasure, if you can say that,
Bro.
of sightseeing Northampton, or at least their workshops, which wasn't truly a pleasure if you didn't get it from my voice. And yeah, then when I needed
Bro,
to
one
go
time I
back,
don't go with you. One time.
then I needed to go back to Warsaw, because I needed to be at one place in Warsaw by like, what was it? I needed to be there, if I recall correctly, like 6:30. So I was like, yeah, cool. I've got my flight that's supposed to be 2:20 p.m. It's all gonna be good. So I walk into the
Bro,
airport.
that's
and,
so much foreshadowing again.
yeah.
That is foreshadowing.
And you guys remember when I spoke about the fucking coffee?
Mhm.
Guess who won a fucking ticket for a few free groping at the airport?
You get the full
I
body
got
shake-
free groping at the airport.
full body shakedown. Let's go.
Yes, boy. I got touched like I never got touched by another man.
Oh, we might fix that then.
Sorry, uncle, you weren't that good. So there was that. And then as I arrived, I got a message that my previous flight was perfectly delayed in a way that if I were 10 minutes earlier, I would have caught it. But, well, I didn't. So there was that. And the next flight
Bro,
got delayed first 10 minutes, then another 20, then it got delayed to a total of 80 minutes, so I got late. And in the whole meantime, my leg was hurting like a bitch. So it was a great weekend. I'm never going to fucking Leicester again.
Holy shit, what is
Ah,
That's
and I
what
only
happens
meant-
when I leave you one time, man. I leave you one time.
And I only mentioned that leg because it means you're not going to the last Polish GT of the year, which is in Bielsko-Biała, a 3v3 team event. So, guys, maybe a word or two about the meta going on there. I seen, I think, Kraken Tyranid builds prevalent. Do they play well into the Thousand Suns and Flamers, in your opinion?
You mean me bringing Kraken?
For example, yeah. Are you like the only person taking Kraken?
I think so.
I think so.
Oh, all right. Well,
Although that is a really interesting question to ask.
in my
because I am
defense,
the-
I
am
didn't
the
look at
Thousand
many
Suns
teams.
player. I am the Thousand Suns player, and he's the guy who brought Kraken, who will not be playing it though. So what do you think about that matchup, Typhus?
I think it's a drawish.
You think so?
Yeah.
Interesting. I think
At
it's
least after my talks with David, Vic, and Yokul.
Yokul told you that. Oh, interesting. I think he.
I mean, he didn't tell me it directly. I got told by Vic and David, who playtested it with Yokul.
I see, because I've seen Yokul just destroyed Liam with Kraken, which made me think it might be actually favorable for the Kraken.
I think it can be. That was the idea why I was supposed to play it. But I think it's a matchup that can be very dependent on many different factors.
So it's basically unsolved.
Yeah, I think it should be. Yeah, I could agree it's favorable if you know how to play it. With me playing perfect 0 games with Kraken, and I was supposed to learn the army on the first day of the event, I didn't feel as comfortable, but yeah.
Interesting. Well, I haven't played it either, so maybe I will have the chance.
I think I think Kraken is a nice army when I actually went through it and thought about it a lot. I think
You mean a nice army in the sense that it's broken?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
It's just
so in the
broken
newest,
in
the newest, the hottest takes that you can have on the internet, Nid's good is the case still. It's been only 8 months.
What I like about it, I think it's less forgiving than any other previous obnoxious Tyrannies build.
I mean, it is way more difficult to play than, for
So
example.
I think it's unless you are a good player, you will not be good with it. I mean, maybe not good with it.
Skill involved then.
Yeah, which not like with 36 warriors, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Any other hot takes from the lists?
I think actually Chaos Knights into that format I mean, Imperial Knights actually fit pretty well.
That's what I've been thinking, bringing them. We've been
Yeah.
we've been thinking a lot about them, and I think they have been slowly falling out of the meta harder and harder with each month, each event, each army that appears. And now suddenly with the flamers, with the demons, with
Let's be honest. They will not be great within few weeks,
I don't think so. When the guard comes out, they are
and
toast.
more people have Wotan. That's a
They are
straight
toast,
no-no.
yes. But in this brief amount, like in this small space of this particular event, and right now this meta, I think Knights are quite legit. As
They are good.
they
I think they have drawish matchup against Kraken.
exactly
think
they will have
they
a
have
lot of
drawish
drawish
matchups. Drawish matchup into Harleys and drawish matchup into Thousand Suns.
Yep, pretty much. Which is
Which-
very good, very dependable.
And can win against Necrons.
Yeah, definitely.
Which,
Yeah.
when you count those out, and they get butt fucked by Creations of Bile. And by that I mean Abaddon. But I think all of this creates an interesting interaction that when we go to those Freeman events, I think, I don't know about you guys, I literally was thinking only about those other teams that I know we will have to play to win the event.
Yeah, absolutely. This is exactly. This is kind of coming back to the topic of building a team, unless, but this time it's like a 3-man event with very specific type of pairing process. Let's not get super deep into that because I think it's very, very specific to these types of
And
events.
Freemans aren't as interesting.
Yeah, they are not that interesting. They're kind of a way to play singles, but now you're a team of 3. And you
can blame someone else.
Exactly, or get carried like a bitch.
But the principles still seem to apply, at least in some way.
True, absolutely true. What was I supposed to say? Yeah, we've been straight up focusing on the top teams and trying to figure out a way to deal with what we knew the top players are going to bring. We didn't care about the broader team comp or other matchups at all. Just trying to.
Did you expect me and Myson to bring what we've brought?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
I'm talking to Myson like every day.
Fair.
All right, guys, there you have it. We've covered the team building and some bonus content in terms of Typhus's tragic
Why you should
trip to
never
Leicester.
fucking go to Leicester. That place is
Yeah.
cursed.
No, you are cursed, bro.
No,
You
no.
are.
That place is cursed. You know why? Because Brian got to final twice as well. Something is wrong with that place.
Avoid it at all costs.
Shots fired. I love you, Brian. Sorry.
Such a cock. Such a complete cock.
All right, guys, before we derail this conversation further, thanks very much.
Even further?
Yeah, even further. Thanks very much for coming in. Our guests today have been Typhus
Hello.
and Pumba.
Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah, always great to have you guys on, and hopefully we have covered the questions that you were looking to have answered. And until next time, remember to subscribe, hit the bell button, leave a like if you like what we do, and we will speak to you soon. Hopefully. Right, bye everyone. That's it for today.